Hello and welcome to the youth political podcast that is PolitiBabble. I'm Oliver Sykes, and as usual, I'm joined by my sublime co-host,
Archibald Elliott.
Well, welcome back to another week of the fantastic podcast that is PolitiBabble that I've obviously just already reiterated. If you didn't catch last week's episode, we were joined by Andrew Langan-Newton, leader of the Isle of Man Green Party. It was a pleasure to be joined by him in the studio. But this week, we're back to ourselves, as per, and this week we are looking at the idea of patriotism, which is going to be an interesting one to discuss. I'm not entirely sure where we will see ourselves siding on the matter, but I'm sure that Archie's going to be very much pro, which I assume I will be as well.
Oliver's said there that he doesn't know where we'll stand, but then said where we'll stand. So
well, yes. Well, we're not
there.
entirely sure
Yes.
at the moment, but
we both know that we do love PolitiBabble, so we're very patriotic towards it.
Of course, indeed. But as well as this, we'll be looking at our latest current affairs and our special features as well, which we enjoy. So obviously, stay tuned, keep listening, as we've got a lot to talk about in this week's episode. So, in terms of what is patriotism, shall I go through that first, Archie, unless you have anything you want to start talking about?
Well, I think it defines, as the dictionary definition, as devoted love, support, and defence of one's country and national loyalty, almost. And it's usually, as I'm sure we'll go into later, it's usually quite confused or confuzzled with the idea of nationalism, which is an entirely different scheme of work, which is more the policy of indoctrination or asserting the interests of one's own nation as separate as the interests of other nations. So there's a slight difference there. It's almost an excessive form. It's almost like a more enforced form of patriotism. So maybe I'd liken it to the likes of socialism and communism, how communism goes a lot further than socialism. Some socialists don't want to ever progress to communists, just like some patriots would never really seek to progress to the form of nationalism that hits so many countries.
Well, of course, that definition is very, very good one. I'm sure that many of us, I'm certainly one of them, that has a great passion for my country, especially as being born on the Isle of Man. I do feel very passionate about that, as well as many others do. But there are times when people don't feel as passionate, perhaps when the country is going through crises that they have got themselves into, or not.
Can you give an example?
Well, perhaps. Do you mean over here, or do you mean?
Or just anywhere? Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that some Russians at the moment are not probably particularly pleased with the Putin regime.
But if we look at it and think about, we break down patriotism, it isn't necessarily, it's not there as a love for the regime. You're not patriotic towards who's in power. But the true love for the country really is when you're maybe disheartened with the way the way the country's being led, the way the leaders are taking a country. It's really saying, no, I love my country so much that I will say, no, I don't want my country being wrecked by X, Y, Z. And many do. And it's an innate love for the country. It's not a love for the regime or the crises that the country gets in. Patriotism's more this whole rounded thing that really is just being very, to use the word in its own definition, very patriotic and very love of one's own country. It's not necessarily related to that regime. And I think that's, again, a distinction that needs to be made, because many people say, well, if you don't support our government, then you're not patriotic, or if you don't support this, you're not patriotic. But patriotism comes in so many ways and can be almost expressed in so many ways. I think it's impossible to limit it to such confines. It really is just patriotism comes in so many different forms. A person's love for their country could mean they go out and pick up litter because they view that keeping their own country and their environment really staying proud of it. Or another person could say, "Oh, patriotism to my country is enacting or taking part in our democracy," which I view as a key constituent to our democratic system and our country as a whole.
No, I do completely agree with those points that you've put forward there, Archie. On the matter that, it is what someone's perception is doing the right thing in one way or another. I suppose there are times. Has there ever been a time when you've not felt sort of patriotic towards your country at all?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Would you?
I did joke I would just hold in just for pure irony, because obviously we're on Manx radio. It's kind of in the name. Manx.
Oh yes.
I did joke for irony I should just bring in a Union Jack just to, stick behind.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, the Manx radio colours, they're not. They don't really have anything that sort of resembles the Manx flag. They don't really display the Manx flag, really.
But they do have the nation station.
They do have, yeah.
And obviously we have the Ramsey Bakery time as well, which is now
your
sponsored,
Ramsey. Yes, of course, your Ramsey
we
Bakery time.
We should be getting paid for this. We're doing this every week now. Talking about Ramsey Bakery time. They haven't sponsored our show, so that's maybe what we should aim for.
Well, hopefully
sponsorship deals.
Hopefully one day we'll get out our real demo, and perhaps we will be live on air, perhaps one day. Perhaps a youth.
We should get some merch.
Merch,
yeah. Called
I think PolitiBabble merch would look good. I think our logo is exceptional.
Yeah, it's just our heads,
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I think Archie's spectacle, it really adds to it.
Monocle, yes.
Monocle.
Yes.
Sorry, wrong terminology. I think my eyebrows do really make the logo. I have to say. When Archie asked me, we're going a bit off topic here, but it's just funny, isn't it? When Archie said when he was creating the new logo for PolitiBabble, he said, "Oh, what feature do you want to have?" And I said, "Oh, my eyebrows." I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe that's because the feature I like. I don't know.
Yes.
But yes. It's interesting when I was sort of looking into this topic. It says that that one of the sort of quotes I took from some sort of research was that countries won't survive without patriotism. They won't survive or prosper. And I suppose that's one thing that we've seen in the UK a lot, especially with the Conservatives. They're very proud of the United Kingdom. And I suppose that's that whole idea with not wanting to separate it, not wanting to see that sort of separation, especially with Scotland.
That's more unionism.
Yeah, unionism.
Distinction.
Yeah. But they're very strong on it. I have to say.
I'd say some more than others, as we have with any party. There's a range of opinions, but I think it does stand to reason that a country would not survive or prosper without patriotism, because if the citizens don't love their country, they're not really inclined to make their country better or have their country, proud and put it forth. And again, if we look at maybe if you aren't proud of your country, maybe you don't want the country to exist, and then the country would not prosper because it would cease to exist. So it is a concept. I think in a way we all do have an innate patriotism about our country, because we are not necessarily proud of. Some people aren't necessarily proud of their government. They're not pushing forward, proud of the regimes who rule them, but they are generally quite proud of where they come from. If they go back in their adulthood or even later in life, they think, well, this is where I grew up. They have a connection, and there's that connection to that place, which I do think builds this idea of patriotism. Obviously, some people maybe dislike where they are in the world, or dislike X, Y, Z. But I still think 9 times out of 10, I've not found research, I haven't been able to ascertain research on this, but I think still 9 times out of 10, from my experience, if you put someone in the room and you argue about whose country is best, you end up arguing on the side of your own country or where you're from. Because there is that innate sense of patriotism that I think incurs from us, even from both. We have an attachment, and I think that attachment forms patriotism. But too often we see patriotism confused with nationalism. We see it confused, and while some people are nationalistic and others aren't, we see almost this idea of say I'm a patriot or I'm patriotic, is suddenly a bad thing, which is nonsensical because we've almost lost the meaning of the word. I think that's something very key, which has happened.
You're exactly right there, Archie. I mean,
We're just we're an echo chamber on this podcast.
No, because like I've previously just stated it in the podcast, and I'll admit I was wrong here. It's good to admit when you're wrong. It's how you learn from things. But I've sort of, when I've been looking into this, I've been thinking, and like I just said, you said, well, that's actually being a unionist, and then you've got a nationalist, and you've got these sort of variants in ideologies. So they do sort of blend into one in a sense, but they all are slightly different from each other. So yeah, it's interesting that we see the different blends. But I suppose in terms of like the difference then between patriotism and nationalism, what would you say is the key difference that separates them? Just for our listeners and me in a sense.
Well, I would say it's just going the extreme and saying that your country's ideas are better than anyone else's, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing when done in moderation, like anything, even healthy eating. Things are brilliant in moderation, but if they go to excess, it usually ends up going wrong. We see, I think, throughout history, we see governments use patriotism, people's innate love for their country, to misguide them, to mislead them, and lead them down a very harmful route that's usually damaging. But that's only when it's done to extreme. If we're putting forward and we say, yes, our country has done many great things, I see no problem with that. A good touch of nationalism isn't a bad thing, I would say, either. But if it's more when they go as a cover for intense nationalism, and they almost go and maybe in some ways they overlook what's logical. They overlook logical policy, and they're so blindsided by we are our nation, so we must be right. It doesn't go so well. It's brilliant to be almost a hub of multicultural living, or taking the best ideas and moving forward with them. We see England, I think, the UK, United Kingdom, has become a hub for multiculturalism. There's nothing more English, I think, as some people say, to go out for a curry, which is hilarious, or go out for a pizza, or go out for a Chinese.
Yeah.
We don't have a English cuisine that people go and think, I was going to have an English.
Well, I mean, sort of,
it's quite entertaining.
There's a lot of staple kind of perhaps pub meals, you would say. For example, I don't know, pie and chips, or
Isn't it pie and mash?
Pie and mash.
But
pie and chips.
But the pubs which have exported around the world happen to be the Irish pubs.
I mean,
so
there's
just this hub.
Well, what is it in terms of curry? It's the chicken tikka masala, isn't it? That's
probably. Yes.
It's not even an Indian cuisine. It is actually an English thing, because they've
just like carbonara, which is another one.
Yeah.
Which I think the Americans created or something, or British. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but going back to your point there, what I said, I suppose patriotism is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. This is my view. Whereas we see nationalism, when it goes too far, it can be a bad thing. I mean, we've seen instances over here on the Isle of Man in the past with Manx nationalists. I'm pretty sure it will be quite a while back, whether it was I think maybe in the 90s or the 80s. I'm not too sure. I'm pretty sure they set fire to houses or something. But in terms of patriotism, there's not really much you can go wrong in the sense, can you?
Well, it's only when it's misleaded.
Yeah.
So, when it misleads people. So it's almost when maybe you'd send people out to war just to line your pockets of your arms factories and saying, well, do your patriotic duty and go to war. When in theory, yes, if it's done for the right reasons, it's very useful and it's very good and it's honourable and it's upstanding. But when it's done for the wrong reasons, it then goes something totally wrong. It's more when they use it and they use buzzwords like it's patriotic duty, or it's now we see more buzzwords happen like it's racist to do that, or it's transphobic to do that, or it's to do that, or ick to do whatever. it's almost when it's used just as a buzzword, when it's subjugating from its meaning. I think that's when it starts to go downhill usually.
Yeah, I think it's perhaps used to guilt people as well into doing things. So oh, you're not doing that. Oh, that's ridiculous. You should be showing your affection. You should be showing doing your duty for your country.
But what would that refer to necessarily?
Well,
because in most cases I would probably agree you should be doing your duty for your country.
Yeah,
but it's only when it's misused for not actually doing the duty for the country, it's to do for another mean, and that's where I think it goes slightly dodgy.
So, for instance, if you're wanting me to refer to an example, I could perhaps suggest that, one is not particularly, doesn't celebrate a particular event or day that is very meaningful to your country or your area, or perhaps, or other things such as, trying to think what else could be classed as it, really, unless you have anything.
Well, I'd say it's mainly people showing disdain for maybe natural environment. Littering, I would argue, is your patriotic duty not to litter, or just being disrespectful, being discourteous, or like burning flags.
Yeah,
is anything form of disrespect? I would say it isn't really being upstanding citizen, but I still think it is built in the majority of us to be proud of our country. I don't see what's wrong with that. It's being proud of our culture and preserving that culture. I think that's what does make the world so interesting, because if we got rid of patriotism, we'd all end up thinking the same. We'd end up like 1984, where we all think the same. We all do the... Have I gone dead?
No, you're all right.
I think I just... I hit my cable on my headphones.
You're all good.
I was wondering why it cut off from my ears, but it says my cable. But
can you hear now?
I can hear now.
It's just a bit of a new experience for me on the desk, guys. So apologies if there are any technical difficulties today.
No, I managed to twist my cable, and it's gone a bit odd. But going back to my point about what was it?
Showing so your country. This is what globally. If we scrap patriotism,
we end up
disaster.
we end up like
disaster.
we end up like 1984, but we all end up thinking the same. And rather, if we have patriotism, we're proud of our country, we're fond of our country, we love our country. We then may end up keeping these different cultures, not just amalgamating into one right think sort of move.
Definitely. Yeah, in a sense, it's an important issue, and it's definitely not a bad thing in my view. So I think really we've come to the conclusion. I don't think unless there are any other points that you wish to sort of.
No, there's more points to make the case for patriotism. I think mainly I find issue with how patriotism is being misunderstood in society.
Yeah. Which is like, for instance, how I've got muddled up with the differences, and it's not really talked about.
But at least in your case, you're not putting a negative connotation there.
No, of course not. I wouldn't dare do such a thing, Archie.
Or you get another pay cut. But no, the negative connotations with it are really it's almost I would deem it the woke brigade. It's become almost unreputable now to go and hoist up a British flag or a flag of St. George's flag, or even go out and say no, we should go and keep our old statues of our country's heritage, or even go keep our old times. I think there's a case in the news where it's going out to a consultation or something in the UK. They're going to get rid of. I forgot. There's a borough in North London. I'll get it up in a minute. Where they want to remove it because of links to some unsavoury activity or like slavery or something like that. But it's almost they want to cleanse our history of anything. Yes, we recognise certain things were bad, but it doesn't mean we should suddenly rip down statues or change place names. And yes, I'd say that isn't a form of patriotism to just go wipe your country clean. It's almost saying, I'm not going to accept whoever did that. And I think that was, it's the entire suburb of Tulsi Hill wants to be cancelled as the council decolonisers closes. And that was in The Guardian, I think, yesterday. Not The Guardian, no, goodness, not The Guardian. The Guardian wouldn't say anything of the sort. No, it's in The Telegraph yesterday, the much more reputable paper that it is.
Oh, yes, The Guardian, you're not a fan, are you?
Yes, no, certainly not.
Well, does that conclude our section on patriotism?
Well, it's probably good to give a alternative
View. Okay. Yeah.
So I'll give an example from, I think, Benedict Anderson was writing in 91, and was rebutting, really saying that yes, he argued that almost communities are imagined. So there's almost no it's neither having a feeling of obligation towards other countries of our community, members of our community is really not is not completely rational. But it's almost this idea that communities are imagined, I think. So almost this idea of communities are imagined, really, can we have a form of patriotism? Because after all, we are just, you could argue all countries are just imagined. So if countries are just imagined, is there any real need to have patriotism? I think it's the alternative view I'd present and throw at you, Oliver.
I struggle to agree with that viewpoint. I just...
Do you not believe that nation states are made up?
Well, they are.
So then, is there any point to be proud of a made-up thing?
Well, that's just silly, isn't it? We need to be proud of our states. I don't see why it should be scrapped.
So if let's say you have a little puppet there and you call it the king and you say it rules over me, is it right to be? Is it make sense to be proud of that? It's a made-up thing.
Well, it's.
I just playing devil's advocate.
Well, it depends what you feel is important, isn't it? Everything's made up, isn't it?
So then, why is there any point of being proud of something that's made up?
Oh, this is more philosophical, this, Archie.
Well, it's a key point.
It exists, doesn't it? It's not made up. It exists.
But you've just admitted that a country is made up. That everything is made up.
Well,
so how can it exist and be made up? It can't be the two states at once. Just asking questions.
I know you're just asking questions, but it's putting me in a difficult position. It's like Rishi Sunak today being asked about...
we'll come on to that.
We'll come on to that in your UK and international news section, Archie. But yes, it's difficult to see... I mean... I was hoping to put in avoid the question, which
which you're trying to do now.
Which we're trying to do now.
But I'll point to another example. I think Kateb in 2000 he strengthened his claim of irrationality to be patriotism, patriotic. He argues that citizens are not exactly discernible individuals, and that social ties are impersonal and invisible. So such a position of being patriotic is contrary to reason and is hence an immoral belief. So if something is really, they're not discernible individuals, or it's not really a society exists, is it any point being patriotic?
That if...
Well, if the nation states don't exist, if citizens aren't really part of a nation state, if they're not discernible individuals, and it's irrational, therefore, to just be proud of something that isn't real, is there any point to being patriotic? Because you've admitted that nation states, or you might want to retract that, but you've said that nation states aren't real. You've admitted they're made up. So why is
they are real. I will withdraw my comments. I will withdraw my comments there. They are real, but what I'm saying is that things are made up. That's what I'm saying.
Let's point to another example. We see many of the country's borders over the past 100 years have massively changed.
It is made up because it didn't exist in the first place. There we go. It is real.
But is it? Let's say
it's now formed.
But so we go to, let's say, parts, and you wind back the clock to the 1400s when Britain controlled a good chunk of France. So that was then part of Britain, or England at the time, because it wasn't yet an act of union. Should then those who live in parts of France be patriotic towards England?
Ooh.
How do you class patriotism? If patriotism is the links to one's country,
it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Is it rational for them to be proud of the country they become, or are we going back to ethnic homelands?
Well, there you go, and it's personal choice, isn't it? You know.
Just asking you.
No. If a state doesn't exist, yeah. I'm not really. I will say no comments. I will not further.
But do you not believe that these things are just arbitrary lines that divide us?
Well, No.
So you don't believe that a line on a map, you believe a line on the map really does mean something?
Well, yes.
So I point you to an example of Africa, which in the scramble for Africa, the scramble for concessions
Oh,
in the
God.
1800s, we just drew lines up. The Europeans literally carved up Africa by drawing a ruler and drawing a line. That's why there's so many straight lines on the African borders. Should those then in those countries be just it means something to them? Because for most of them it didn't. They still kept within their ethnic homelands.
But most things that was in a the world is far more developed now than it was then.
But we imposed lines on people. Should that mean something? Someone is imposed something on you. Someone said, you were born here, therefore you are XYZ, or you live here and we've changed our borders, so now you're XYZ this. Does that mean something?
Well, things change, don't they? And whatever it is at the time is what it is, isn't it?
But surely that means it has no real meaning, because if things just change, well, tomorrow it could be this, tomorrow it could be that. So is there then any point of being patriotic to something that's going to change in 5-10 years?
Yeah, it's just a difficult one to answer in my view. It's a hard question. And
Can I press you for an answer?
You can press me for an answer, and I do believe that, say, if the Isle of Man was to completely change and was to, I don't know,
form part of Ireland,
then I would probably be proud of Ireland.
Really?
Well, because it's no longer the Isle of Man, is it?
So you wouldn't be proud of?
I'd be proud of this area if it was connected to Ireland, but I would be Manx still, because that's what it was at the time that I was born. I don't know. We're just digging into a hypothetical here, which is not what I'm here to do.
Interesting.
Do you not agree with my?
I'm playing devil's advocate here,
I know
so,
it's leading me into difficult waters.
We've had Oliver's so on this programme today. We've had Oliver's questions of what it means to be patriotic questioned. Where Oliver now says, "If we were part of Ireland, I'd be proud to be Irish."
Well, if you when we were here we go. When we were part of the EU, were you proud to be part of the EU?
No.
How come?
Well, I didn't support the EU particularly as a bureaucratic institution.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be proud to be part of the EU because I don't believe there is such thing as an EU citizen. I prefer individual nation states. Mm-hmm. It was useful as a bloc to travel.
Do you believe in lines, and that a country that we were? It was just the earth before we divided up and people ruled and people discovered countries.
I think it's useful to be proud of our communities that we reside in. I don't see what's wrong with
the
creating our communities.
Answer.
No, I think it's right to create our communities, and they do generally draw up their own lines, and they do over time for their own lines. I think it isn't necessarily the most helpful thing to go in and divide up a country and cut through clear ethnic lines. That's ridiculous. But if we look at it, we have certain parts where, let's say, where countries they split over and they overlap between the two, and the group lives in between the two countries, and they're not necessarily proud of the country they're from, but they have a patriotism towards the community they come from, which I think is the much more important, because we are born into a community. We have the community aspect.
Well, you basically answered what I should have said earlier, but I couldn't quite get it out. And the interrogation was not helping.
But I could probably argue back my own point, but
yeah.
we do run out of time.
We do. So essentially, we'll wrap up patriotism now, and that I will put on the record what I will say
that he is really just Irish.
I'm very pro patriotism. I believe it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing, as we set out our discussion to be, which is basically to oppose that view, and essentially as basically, I agree with much of the points that Archie's reiterated, and I will retract what I really said on Ireland, and I am proud to be Manx, and I would continue to be proud to be Manx, even if we did become a part of Ireland, if that ever happened. Hopefully not. But I will. Yes, but if we did join Ireland, I would be proud to be part of Ireland still. It's complicated.
Even if you weren't a supporter of becoming part of Ireland, you would then suddenly change your view and be proud of it.
But then we'd be part of Ireland, so I would still be proud to be Manx.
Would you not try
It's
to
like
get rid of it?
But it's a lot of people who like. Well, we're going back into the topic here, aren't you? Which I'd rather not like to do.
No, but let's say Ireland took us over, or a country took. Let's say a country blob decided to take us over involuntarily. We didn't choose.
I would be proud to be Manx because that's what I was born as.
No, blob
Yep.
takes us over. We didn't choose to be taken over. We're now part of blob. Would you be proud to be part of blob?
Well, yes.
Even though you didn't want it to be taken over by blob.
Well, in the end, I wouldn't be happy in the first instance, but I'm sure over time I would grow to be
Interesting.
fond of that country.
Interesting. Even that country just exploited you.
I wouldn't be happy then.
That's why I find it's an interesting line because
It depends. It depends how it
if I
played
wasn't
out.
voluntarily,
So if I didn't like the country, it's difficult when you play hypotheticals because there's lots of instances that the person's sort of moving
because I would keep my original position. If I was part of the country and I was taken over by another country, I still would not accept another country taking over my sovereignty of my country. I wouldn't view that as right.
Yes, no, definitely. But I mean, over time, that view could change, which is what I'm trying to say.
But to sum up,
if I didn't have a problem with that, if we fell into difficulty and we had to we agreed with this country, we're going to join you, I don't know, I'm just, yeah.
Well, to sum up
yeah.
to sum up my own views, I believe patriotism is a good thing. It helps bring us together. It creates a sense of community. It's not really linked to nationalism. It's just a love for our country, a good, strong connection to our country. That is a good thing. It's good to be proud of our country, and it does generally build a country to be a better item. But to sum up on the devil advocate, the alternative point of view put forth on PolitiBabble today, nation states do not truly exist in a form, and even if they do exist, it's pointless it's irrational to be proud of them because they're just arbitrary lines drawn on a page, and it's irrational to have care for a fellow citizen just purely because they were born next to you. It doesn't make sense. It has no rational hinge on opinion. But obviously I've disagreed with that. I put forward my case to disagree with a devil advocate view. I think that's probably something useful to do in future, play devil's advocate. So we get a wide range of views on PolitiBabble.
Yeah, well, just to wrap up, I've just quickly forgotten, but we did have a suggestion from...
we did?
We did have a couple of points from our listeners, so that was pretty interesting. But yes, which we were... I'm really sorry, I slid up listening into Studio One, so you've got a little hint of Studio One there.
A little hint of Alex in the afternoon.
But I'll redo that. So we had a few of our listeners get in touch. I put out a little call earlier this afternoon to see what their view was. Sam, who's a regular contributor to this section, said if they are just proud of their homeland and culture whilst it's still being tolerant of all, then it's fine. And then we got another one which is completely not related, but one of our previous guests, Mika, said excited to hear this one. Will be a great debate. Well, we've had a great little time.
Agreement.
We've had little.
But to respond to Sam's comment, I don't necessarily think the person doesn't necessarily have to be tolerant of other cultures necessarily. If they feel, for example, that their own culture is being destroyed because other cultures are being impressed on it, I don't think therefore we should be necessarily tolerant. I think we should be tolerant to other cultures existing and having their own space. But a culture should not impress on another culture. So I think it is, again, they can be proud of their homeland and culture while still being tolerant of them all. I think the tolerance has to be applied when it is fair to apply tolerance, and where it is obviously acceptable to apply tolerance. And obviously I would say if someone was to suddenly impose their culture on me, I wouldn't be particularly tolerant of that happening. But I think on the whole he has a solid point, but I think there needs to be still a caveat added to that tolerance.
Well, I completely agree with you, and obviously, as we said, we'll move on now. So we will, of course, now be looking at my favourite section, of course, which is Isle of Man news, which should be coming on right now. Don't know why it isn't. That'll be why. There we go. We have now the Isle of Man news for this week. There's been no cause to review our approach to COVID, says the Isle of Man's Public Health Director. Preparations are underway for the anticipated TT demand, says Manx Care. On top of this, there is active cases dropping below 2,000 as we've seen a big spike as well as this, we have also seen government keeping open mind on child physical punishment laws. So there we go. That wraps up Manx News. Just looking at a little bit of the headlines, as well as this. I might as well just go through it again. But with Manx Care claiming 4% pay offer would put staff ahead of England, but they rejected the offer, and a new minimum wage rate. So I thought just quickly add a few more on there. So yeah, that's interesting. Firstly, we'll start off with TT preparations with COVID. So next week they're aiming to scrap COVID restrictions.
Yippee!
But we're going to be seeing a lot of pressure. Presumably, we're going to still have COVID cases in the hospital still. I mean, I don't know how this is all going to really work, because people are going to be in the hospital, though we're scrapping the testing. We're moving to the endemic stage, for those of you that don't know.
£9 for a testing set?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Which is quite concerning. And obviously, as I just mentioned, the COVID cases have hit around 2,000 in the past week. And the first headline that I suggested was that the public health director has said that this variant is no more deadly. It's just a bit more it's just I'll get what she set up. I don't want to be drawing conclusions. But yes, essentially, and it's popped away has the article. Just finding it here. Yes. No cause to review our planned change to COVID approach, because Henrietta says the BA2 variant of Omicron, now widespread on the island, is 80% more transmissible. There we go, I was right, it is transmissible than the Omicron strain. So that is why we're seeing such huge amount of cases, but it's not causing any greater severity of the illness. Yet. So on March 31st, we're due to move to the endemic stage, and you know that is a big jump. It does sort of really wrap up our COVID experience on the island.
Yes, and finally we can stop mentioning it on the podcast.
Yeah, there might be a ban. I'm not sure.
Yep, there's a ban.
There's a ban.
There already was a ban, all of them.
There already was a ban, but I keep breaking it, which is really bad.
Another good news, fuel duties dropped 5p a litre.
Oh yes, I missed that one. There's just always so much to get through.
There's really,
which I do apologise.
There's a really interesting case on the island, because we have two main petrol providers, or fuel providers. We have Max Petroleum and EVF. And the other day when I was talking, I won't mention which one was which, just save on legal expenses.
Of course.
But one was 163 pence per litre for diesel, and the other one was 153 pence per litre for diesel, or 162 was one of them, and it was quite ridiculous. The 10p difference.
Is it
or 9p difference?
I can't really. I would have to introduce the names, which I'm not going to do. But yeah, no. We're doing.
And today, I actually saw passing one petrol station that diesel was at 163. Super unleaded, usually more expensive than diesel, was a 159.
Wow.
And basically, they hadn't reduced the price of diesel. So whether they'll be keeping their rates the same just to gain the extra 5 pence per litre, who will know? It'll be interesting to see.
I'm not a driver, so I don't buy fuel or any other motor vehicle that needs to be powered by fuel. So I'm not too familiar with how much, I don't have the experience of it. But yes, the government keeping open mind on physical punishment laws. This comes as Wales outlawed the physical punishment of children in any form. To be, I think it's illegal.
But if you look at it, I'd say child abuse on any sort is absolutely morally irreprehensible and wrong. But a smack, I really don't see. I don't see the cause to make it illegal. Maybe make it discouraged.
Oh well. But the problem is what's discouraged. But the problem is,
Archie, parents should be able to
smack their child.
No, I didn't say that.
I'm just
I said
saying.
parents should be able to parent in their own way, and we have seen in recent years an entire detriment to the young population, and that has been a direct fault of either policies being introduced, social change, not spending time at home, a lack of family values, and we have seen a massive change in the way we treat our children, and we wonder why we're seeing an increase in antisocial behaviour. We wonder why we're seeing a discipline problem in schools. We wonder why we're seeing the rudeness just increase in large levels. I sound like an 8-year-old here when I say this. But we have really become, I think, too soft as a community. Yes, obviously child abuse, I would say, in all forms is wrong. But there's a very large difference, I think, between the two. And they liken full-on injuring a child, which is incompletely wrong, to a light smack, which is entirely different. And it might just be off the cuff, and it wasn't intentional. But that would then be illegal and be prosecutable, which is nonsensical. And then you have children complaining or threatening to say to their parents, well, I'm going to say that you smacked me. And how would you... Proving these cases would be entirely implausible, and it would be hard to prove. And in child abuse cases, they should have intervention. They do have intervention, but in what they're banning here, child abuse is already banned. I don't get what they're trying to achieve with this. I think it's again a waste of legislative time to undertake.
No, and like you say, a child could perhaps make an accusation.
But the child abuse cases are already being investigated. They rightly should be investigated, and they're rightly covered already under the law. So I'm really confused what they want to ban here, because anything severe is already, or detrimental to the child's health, is already banned under law. So I find it very confusing.
Well, would you like to move on to a bit of UK and international
Well, there's one
news?
thing which is I was reading today, watching a piece of Sky, a clip of Sky News, and was interviewing the Sunak and asking Rishi Sunak about his wife's father's business, a company which has dealings or shares in a company that has a delivery office in Russia or something. And I found it very, very confusing. We don't need the music.
We do. It's the UK news.
It's a discussion.
I know, actually. We'll just have it down in the background.
But I find it very, very confusing why the interviewer, she was asking Sunak about XYZ, because I'm very, very sure if that was a female chancellor, and that was a male interviewer interviewing the female chancellor about her husband's father's business dealings, the interviewer would be accused of being sexist or a misogynist, that it was suddenly that a woman should be responsible and be answered to her husband's. It's ridiculous.
Yes, if it were...
Sunak is not a shareholder of that company, or at least is not involved in the running of that company. He should not be expected to know what happens in that company, nor does he have really any influence on that regard. So I find it very... And even if he does have influence, he can't exercise that because he is the Chancellor of the United Kingdom. I find it a very rogue line of questioning. I think it's frankly wrong.
But if we're, looking at leading an example, surely, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and his family should be setting an example.
But is it his wife's family?
Well, yeah, I suppose that is, yeah.
Are we to now assume that the male person in the household must have control over what the wife's or the family does? No, that's ridiculous. Again, these things are run, and they're usually not run by the individuals. They are run by the companies. The companies make their business decisions. And he said he has advised businesses X, Y, Z, but he has no real... He shouldn't have control over what his wife's business or his wife's father's business chooses to do. It's ridiculous that we have this line of questioning. There's many more pressing issues of the day, maybe asking, well, what will we be doing to cut the tax heavy impact on low-income people? What will we be doing to do this or do that, or solving the actual issues of the day, rather than just having this petty tittle-tattle, which really does nothing?
Well, are there any further UK or international news stories you'd like to cover?
We had P&O. Ferry is not related to cruises. They are a separate company. It's good to remind people. They're interesting sacking of 800 UK workers in favour of hiring agency workers. I think at about $5.50 per hour rather than the minimum wage, because they're registered in Cyprus. They don't have to use the UK minimum wage. And their boss has admitted to MPs that they not consulting on cuts broke the law, because they didn't consult unions. So that will be very interesting to see what will happen. Yeah, no, it is interesting. I mean, it's not good what P&O have done. So yeah. Would you like to move on then
to one of our specials?
You choose.
Okie dokie. Well, we will move on, and we will look at perhaps one of our special features here on PolitiBabble, which is
You sound very much like Andy Wintz when you say PolitiBabble.
PolitiBabble.
Yes. It's very entertaining.
All right. Well, fair enough. I take that as a compliment. So, are we wanting to do Fill the Cabinet this week, or are we wanting to do Avoid the Question? It's up to you.
Your
Archie.
choice, Oliver.
Oh no, and my computer has sadly departed from us, so I'll have to be using my phone for the rest of the episode, which I'll just have to get onto. This is why
Oliver should be organised and bring one of these cables here, a
I
charger.
I have a charger in my bag, but I thought it was.
Oh.
I thought it would withstand the rest of the podcast, Archie.
How's the password? Well, I think is that a sign to yes. Well, what should we do?
Well, I can use my phone.
Like I said, yes, your choice.
Okay, well,
we're very indecisive here on PolitiBabble today, Oliver.
We are. Okay, let's be.
You need to answer a question of what will we do.
Okay, well, let's be affirmative in our decision, and let's go for. We will bring back Fill the Cabinet next week.
Yes,
we'll have. We'll go. We like to, because we only introduced that new special a few weeks ago. We'll keep rotating. So let's go with Avoid the Question, and perhaps I shall try and avoid the question, unless you want to.
He's been doing it all episodes, so he's done enough for today, I think.
Okay, well, I'll put forward some questions to you then, Archie. So, yesterday, the spring statement was
wonderful statement, yes.
was made by Rishi Sunak, which is going to inevitably leave families in quite uncomfortable positions financially.
Yes.
Do you believe that is a? I take it we'll go for your Tory minister, because you like doing that kind of stuff. Do you believe that's okay?
Well, the government can only do so much to protect its own citizens, I think. And we must remember there is a £330 tax cut for the lowest, the less well-off in society. I think that's a very good thing. The government, again, it's only able, and it's my actual view, actually, the government is only able to do so much for its own citizens. It can't survive, really, by bludgeoning all the costs on itself. It can only do so much, and it is providing, I think, and it's very beneficial, a £330 tax cut. What else is it supposed to do?
Well, we are seeing we've seen the fastest rates of inflation in the past 30 years, Archie. Isn't it not important to look at the fact that families are, especially the poorest households, that we're not doing enough to support them?
Well, would you not say it's not doing enough by giving 30 million workers, saving them £300, or even cutting income tax for the first time? And again, the fuel duty is being cut by 5 pence. And in the pandemic, the government has done an awful lot to keep those most disadvantaged in society afloat and give them the help that they need. And again, I think they may have gone too far in that regard and put us into more debt, which is even more important. Why now it starts to get finances back on track. Because if we can't provide finances tomorrow, what good is it providing finances today? We must provide and we must prosper for the future generations. We had the biggest net cuts in personal taxes in over a quarter of the century. We must remember it is helping the poorest in our society. And it is doing a good job. We face unprecedented times, and the government is only able to stem that decline so much.
Well, if the Conservatives want to build back better, Archie, why are we facing more tax cuts?
That is building back better. Tax directly links to building back better. The lower the taxes, the faster the country prospers. I shall point you to an example of Hong Kong in the 60s, where they chose not to look at all the statistics. They didn't choose to take GDP and all of the malarkey. They cut tax rates. They had low tax rates, and it prospered. It grew into one of the largest financial hubs in the world in only 30, 40 years. And that is astounding of what free market economics can do, and that is exactly what we should be implementing. We should be implementing tax cuts, which enables growth. It enables more money into the pockets of the individual rather into the coffers and ill-managed money at the state.
And finally, sanctions are, in terms of the UK governments, I don't believe that they are sanctioning Russia enough at the moment.
How can they sanction Russia more?
Well, they can, instead of targeting, businesses in Russia, they can look at the people around Putin and his regime and actually target them.
Is that not exactly what the government is doing, Oliver? The government has introduced sanctions on many Russian oligarchs who are part of Putin's closest circle. They have sanctioned Putin himself and Yanukovych, his foreign minister. The government is actually sanctioning exactly what you put out. And it's not harming the Russian people. And why should we harm and make the Russian people pay, which is exactly what we're not doing? We are sanctioning those exactly round and Putin's inner circle. I find it confusing why you've brought that up.
Shouldn't we have... Well... this may have been, developing, but surely we should have.
State of affairs.
Surely we should have implemented this earlier on.
The government can only act so fast, and it must make sure it is targeting the right individuals. Why would you, if you were, for example, being targeted by a foreign state where you had many billions of pounds of assets, would you want to at least want them to make sure that you are part of what they're saying you're going to do, rather than just off the cuff just go and sanction individuals with nothing related to it? The government acted as fast as it reasonably could, and it did one of the world leadings on some sanctions, and other countries follow suit after it. Countries don't have a combined range of sanctions. Different countries follow at different rates, and the UK has been faster in some regards and slower than others.
Well, thank you, Archie, for avoiding the question this week on PolitiBabble. If you have any questions
those probably do align with my views, so it would rather easy.
Well, there you go.
I do find that last question very funny.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Is there any questions you'd like to ask me, or...?
No.
Well, I suppose that will wrap up today's episode here on PolitiBabble. It's been a great one.
A pleasure as usual.
Of course. It's been great. I'm really enjoying it at the moment. And in terms of next week, I've put forward a few suggestions to Archie of what we may do. I'm not entirely sure whether he's opting for them at all. I suggested that we could perhaps look at the monarchy and whether that should end. I mean, it's all really, should things end?
I was in a very, what's the term? Is it nihilism? Nothing exists.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yes.
Or perhaps we will look at drugs and their advantage and whether they have advantage. I'm not sure whether Archie's looking at me whether they whether we should be implementing
we might need a guest on for that
recreational.
one, I think.
Yes. Well, Archie, unless there is anything specific that we are going to be covering next week, if you do have any suggestions, we'd love to hear from you as usual here on PolitiBabble.
Or if you want to come on as a guest, do let us know. Get in touch at PolitiBabble on most social media, or PolitiBabble@gmail.com. I think we do have a TikTok, although we no longer use that. That might be a medium to get out to you. I saw the Jersey government the other week created a TikTok account that was rather entertaining. The Isle of Man police apparently have one now, I read somewhere, which is very obscure. I think they're posting about police tractors the other week. I saw on Facebook or something.
That is indeed,
yes.
yeah. So if you do want to listen to any more of the podcasts, you can go to manxradio.com/podcast/PolitiBabble. And of course, as we have reiterated, you can get in touch with us on the various social media platforms at PolitiBabble, which is our handle, or at PolitiBabble@gmail.com. And that concludes today's episode.
Yes, hope you had a spiffing time listening to it. I'm sure. Rather good fun.
So you've been PolitiBabbled.
Cheerio.